Hey everyone, today I'm going to go over everything that you can sow indoors 10 weeks before your last frost date. Most seed companies will give you a range for when you can sow either indoors or outdoors your vegetables, your herbs, and your flowers. And now since we're doing 10 weeks before the last frost, those seed packets may say, for example, 8 to 10 weeks, or they might even say 10 to 12 weeks. If the seed packets are giving you an 8 to 10 week window, then you still have a couple of weeks to actually sow those particular crops that you plan on growing. If the seed packets give you a window of 10 to 12 weeks, then this will likely be the final week for you to be sowing those particular things indoors. However, with that said, 1 or 2 weeks outside of the window isn't going to make or break your garden. And if there's something in particular you really want to grow, I say go ahead and sow it. Each week, I start by looking at my calendar to see what I need to be sowing indoors. Everything is built around the last frost date. The first thing that I want to cover today is a concept called cold stratification. Cold stratification is basically the process of mimicking dormancy, or that period of cold that many perennials go through. Now, certain seeds that you're going to be planting do require a period of cold stratification, and the point of this whole process is to help with the germination of those seeds. Not everything requires it, but there are certain perennials that do need it. Rosemary is one of those seeds that has a difficult time with germination, so cold stratification should help it to actually germinate better. Rosemary needs to be sown 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost date. So being 10 weeks out, I have about 2 weeks that I can cold stratify my rosemary seeds. So the way you do it is you take the seeds and you put them on a damp paper towel in a freezer bag, and then put them in the refrigerator for whatever time they need in that cold environment. Then you will take them out and just sow them per usual. I put a little list in the corner of some of the common things you might be planting that do require cold stratification. So if you are intending on sowing them this year, then you do know that you need to go through that process. For everything that requires sowing now, I recommend pre-moistening your seed starting mix before filling your trays. I made the seed starting mix with cocoa coir and perlite. After you've filled your seed tray, you want to give it a couple of good taps to get rid of any air pockets. And then you can go back and top it off. This is a better approach than pushing the soil into the trays because it'll compact it too much and the roots will not be able to get oxygen. Today I'm sowing green onions, also known as scallions, and unlike bulbing onions, which I have a list up in the corner, these can pretty much grow anywhere. Onions should be sown 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost date. Now, green onions are typically grown for their tops. However, I like both the white and the green part of the onion, so you can either pull it completely out of the soil, or you can just cut the tops off at the soil level. They will regrow. They are very hardy and low maintenance, so if you leave them in the ground, they will regrow in the following season. Sow onions 1/4 inch deep. It doesn't have to be exact. I'll plant a few seeds per cell. When it comes time to planting out, I can either separate them, plant them individually, or I can just leave them as is. They like to be bunched together, so they'll grow fine either way. After everything's been sown, you do want to give them some water because you want good contact between the seed and the mix. Always add a label and a humidity dome during the germination phase, which will come off once the seedlings emerge. The next thing I'm planting is eggplant. Eggplant should also be planted roughly 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost. I grow eggplant every year, although these are 4 new varieties I'm trying, and I have found that eggplant takes a long time to germinate. I should mention that all of your seed trays should come with a water tray, or you should at least put them in something where you could bottom water once the seedlings germinate. This is a healthier way of watering after germination. For the most part, whether you're growing onions, eggplant, herbs, flowers, the process for sowing is pretty standard. Always follow the seed packet instructions. It will always provide the depth at which you should sow the seeds. Eggplant is sown about 1/4 inch deep, and I do recommend for the majority of what you plant to sow a minimum of 2 seeds per cell because germination rates vary. And if both seeds germinate, then you can thin once they have 2 sets of true leaves, which is also around the time that you start potting up your seedlings. I'll cover potting up in another video. I'm using an old plastic cover from a cake tray because this did not come with a humidity dome. You can also use plastic wrap. Just make sure that you're removing any plastic when the seedlings emerge. Another vegetable in the nightshade family, like eggplant, are peppers. Peppers can also be sown 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost date. However, I sowed mine 14 weeks before the last frost date, only because historically when I've grown peppers, they've taken a really long time to germinate and to put on true leaves. I wouldn't recommend sowing them that early unless you have the space, because as they grow bigger, you're going to have to pot up. I also overwinter peppers and I do have the space to do it. Also, one of my goals this season is to grow really large peppers. I am going to be growing my peppers and eggplant in 10-gallon grow bags as opposed to putting them in my raised beds, which is how I've always grown them in the past. And by giving them their own space, it should help them to grow really big and to put on a lot of fruit. The next thing I'm planting is kale. These are actually seeds left over from last year. I might just have enough to fill this tray. Kale is a cool weather crop, and I'm sowing it indoors to give it a head start, and I will be transplanting it out in the garden about 4 weeks before my last frost date. However, you can also direct sow kale in the garden about 4 weeks before your last frost date. Kale is sown about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch deep. You can grow it as either a baby green or for its mature leaves. Next up are geranium. Geranium is a flower. It is an annual, and I'm going to be putting these in pots around my patio. We always should be thinking about bringing in pollinators and beneficial insects, which love flowers and different types of herbs around the garden. Geranium seeds are sown about 1/8 of an inch, which is pretty shallow, so they only require a very light covering of mix. You can also cover them with just a little bit of vermiculite if you have it on hand. This packet only has 10 seeds, so I will only plant 1 seed per cell. I want to get as many geraniums as possible. I was curious why geranium seed packets come with such few seeds, so I learned that geranium flower heads only produce 3 to 5 seeds per head, which is very little compared to, say, a marigold that produces hundreds of seeds, or a zinnia that produces dozens of seeds. So it's likely the reason why geranium seed packets come with only a handful of seeds. For seeds that require a shallow depth, you can just put the seed on top of the mix and then gently press it in and then cover it just very lightly with the mix. I'm also going to be misting the soil as opposed to watering it in because I don't want to displace those seeds that are very close to the top. In the remaining cells, I'll be planting parsley seeds that I harvested last season. This is just a good way to utilize space by combining herbs, flowers, vegetables that have similar germination times. In the second geranium tray, I am going to sow thyme in those extra cells. I have had a hard time growing thyme in the past. I've tried it a couple of times and I haven't had any luck. And it's likely because where I'm located, we have very wet springs, and thyme does not like any kind of wet conditions. It prefers to be dry. And so it might be the case. I am not sure. I just haven't had any luck with it. I am determined to grow it though. The seeds are really, really small, but they do require a depth of about 1/4 inch. Next up are petunias. They need to be sown 10 to 12 weeks before your last frost date. They are an annual flower. They're beautiful and they bloom from spring to fall. And I find that when you deadhead them, they grow a lot more flowers, although there are some varieties that don't require deadheading. Unlike everything else I've shown you, these require light to germinate. So they should not be covered with anything. All you will do is just take the seed, place it on top of the soil, gently press it in, and put it under a light. So now all of the seed trays are in the greenhouse on heat mats. It is nice and warm in there. I have the majority of them on that dark side on the right. They don't require light to germinate. Once the seedlings emerge, they will be moved under the grow lights. You should check your soil every couple of days to make sure it's moist, and then either spritz it or add some water just to make sure that it stays moist. There's a lot of good humidity under those domes as well. Under the lights, I have my pepper seedlings. I have a fan in there circulating air. And I also have the petunia seeds under the lights because they do need the light to germinate. I suggest running your lights anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day. I'm running mine 16. You could put them on timers and forget about it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe and be on the lookout for upcoming videos.